Let's move on to our next panel. We have Matias Centeno, who is from the INTA. He's a rural extensionist. He works in the University of San Luis, and Gustavo Giorgetti from the director of ThinkNet in Neuquén. The problem with Christian Casan is that his car broke down. He was coming all the way from Jujuy, but luckily we have Patricio with us who's going to help us with everything. Right. Well, we're back. We're going to continue with our tour of Argentina. We continue along the Andes mountain range. And here we have with us Matias Centeno from the National Technology Institute of San Luis. And then we'll go further northwest. We're going to go down to Neuquén. We're going to go a bit further south to Neuquén. We'll be talking to Gustavo Giorgetti. So, Matias, let's start with you, and then we'll continue with Gustavo. Hi, Patricio. Thank you very much. Thank you to Adrian and Olga for inviting me to be part of this fantastic space, which is the South School on Internet Governance, an initiative which, in addition to all the awards it's been given, it has brought us together to work together in many of the tasks that have to do with the digital development underway in many different countries around the world, because the students of these countries go far beyond the geographical borders. So I work in the INTA, which is the Agricultural Technology Institute, which answers to the Ministry of Agriculture and has been active for over 50 years. In the rural development sector. It's based in San Luis, in northeast Argentina, although at the moment I'm in Corrientes province. So this is the reason I can't be with you in person today. It's raining so hard here. I really hope that connectivity doesn't go down. It's raining cats and dogs. So I'd like to try and share a presentation. Let's see. Here we go. Can you see my presentation? Yes, we can. Great. So on this tour about what's happening in different provinces in Argentina, I want to give you a brief snapshot of the issues that we're working on at the INTA in different provinces. Perhaps I have a quite specific view of what's going on in central and east central Argentina, but I do want to share my vision of connectivity in rural areas and internet in rural Argentina. And first, I think we need to look at what is meant by rural Argentina. This is a map produced by our Census and Statistics Institute, which shows where people live. The red dots are urbanizations, urban areas. You can see a lot of red dots around Buenos Aires. And then there are some other key points in Argentina, big ones. And this shows how people come together in a country inhabited by over 50 million people. And on the right, the gray dots are what the index calls groupings. These are settlements of people, these are communities, these are smaller groups of people. Whereas the red dots are urban centers and the gray areas are rural clusters in our country. As you can see, it's pretty big, isn't it? Even so, Latin America is one of the regions with the highest urbanization rates in the planet, in fact. And in Argentina, this is very typical of this trend. According to current data, 91% of the population live in cities. There are Argentine provinces, like in the northeast or in Patagonia, or even in the north and the northwest, where the rural population is much larger, maybe as much as 30%, but at all events, 91% of these people who are living in the cities basically reflects what goes on in the province of Buenos Aires, where 2 point something percent of people live in rural areas. So what does this have to do with what we're looking at today? Our agenda of issues related to internet, or at least our perspective, our take on this, is what we call urban-centric. You look at these big numbers where over 90% of people live in cities. But it's like adding together the cities of Córdoba, Rosario, and La Plata, who are living in rural areas. Now, particularly with everything that went on during the pandemic, and the dynamic produced by the pandemic, particularly its effects on agricultural activity, but we've tried to quantify what happened and try and find ways of expressing this asymmetric access to connectivity between rural areas and urban areas. So these are data from the ENACOM, which is the Argentine Telecommunications Authority. This is, we surveyed 373 rural communities. And what's notable is that 42% of these didn't have any internet connectivity. Now, if you include bad quality internet within that, because part of the problem of rural connectivity actually rises to 80%. That means 80% of these rural communities have really major problems of connectivity, or at the very best, regular. This exacerbates the digital gap, particularly in terms of connectivity, which is something probably that many of the panelists and speakers have already talked about. The first aspect of the digital gap is one that has to do with infrastructure, which is probably the most superficial and maybe the most striking. You know, how many people are in and how people are out. Now, we know perfectly well that infrastructure isn't everything, particularly if people don't have the ability to develop activities using internet, but also to be able to use that digital access to do something interesting with their lives, like, you know, improve their quality of life or feel more included within some form of organization or other. So that's the relevance of the second digital gap, which measures the possibilities that people have. Now, we know that the first digital gap is pretty important, and we're working on the second one in all sectors, not just the rural or agricultural sectors, and in order to create content so we can really enhance that second access. Now, the different provinces in our country show us three kinds of lifestyles, that kind of three areas or three kinds of activity which involve different people in the productive network. So we have a digitalized sector, which has a lot of characteristics, which has been surveyed by organizations like the UN in terms of digital maturity. We have this digitalized sector, we have an emerging sector, and a marginalized sector. The digitalized sector is what we see when we're talking about IT or connectivity, or how internet can be used to facilitate productive life. These are mostly companies, some of them are SMEs, but these are companies that have a strong, robust structure. They have the possibility of accessing funds and resources to enable connectivity. As you can see, the gentleman on the left in the what's known as a wet pampa, he's using a tablet. You can have connections, point-to-point connections in the fields. And basically, not just the state, but the market uses these to can develop products like you can have haymakers which are connected to internet, or maybe have infrared connections which allows them to identify weeds, or you can automate that the routes that the tractor or the harvester will take. So that sector basically has connectivity, has funding, which in turn strengthens their degree of connectivity. And they can develop more strategies to make more of that connectivity. And then we have the emerging sector. We can see here somebody working in the fields in San Luis. She lives outside the city of San Luis, has access to internet through different Wi-Fi points enabled by the government of San Luis, which has a public policy in place to keep its population connected as much as possible. But she doesn't have the same economic capabilities to allow her to automate her production. There is also a scientific sector there which is thinking about other kinds of solutions that this kind of producer simply doesn't fit because of the scale. Because in Argentina, 70% of agricultural producers are like Rosa, the person you see in the middle there. In the world, the family local producers, which you can see here, usually locals, they produce 80% of the food in the world. It's that kind of producer. So the issue isn't just about connectivity, it's about inclusion. This is our major challenge. The market, society, connectivity, this is a triangle, if you like, of connected points, which focuses on this vast productive group, which is literally feeding us. The largest number of people working in the agricultural sector are in this particular emerging sector. They're small producers who don't have access to resources. Now, the sector which I've called emerging is making a major efforts to adapt in social and technical terms. They're trying to make the most of technologies which haven't really been designed for them, because they live in this kind of gray area that I showed you on the map, these communities that don't have full-on connectivity. And talking of connectivity, we seem to have lost. So this sector, during the pandemic, was very much affected. It grew, and there's been a major migration towards the digital world. And in very many parts of the world, there's been a major demand for what we call local foods, and shorter value and supply chains, because people could no longer rely on global supply chains and logistics began to fall apart. So the suppliers of raw materials and basic foods, the local ones, were those who started to supply the foods that most of us had access to during the pandemic. There are many trends, such as the increase in prices, food prices, which are quite negative, and in fact the growth and inflation which is hitting countries all around the world post-COVID. But there is also, if you like, a repositioning of these local markets. And that's much of it is thanks to the digitalization of these sectors, as these small producers began to access basic banking services and were able to start selling their products on WhatsApp or social media using small local networks, which simply didn't exist before the pandemic. And because of this highly unusual situation, they began to blossom. But it's a sector that needs a lot of support. It needs particularly support from the state, and they need a lot of technology and skills. And frankly, they're not often, these needs are not met by the market or other organizations. And then we have the third sector, which I call the marginalized sector. This is a photograph in the north of the province of Mendoza. It pretty much says everything that you can imagine. These are very basic houses made of mud. There is no electricity, water. There isn't any form of basic infrastructure, and there's lots of this around. So we have to tackle the access of these communities to internet beyond the numbers and how many there are and where they are in terms of distribution. The issue is that we need to give this sector visibility. They're barely covered by public policies. There are some sectoral or provincial policies which focus on connectivity, and it certainly would be interesting to be able to work with them to tackle the digital gaps I mentioned, which have to do as much with infrastructure as with skills and how internet can change people's lives. This is going to take me a bit longer, so perhaps we can talk about this in the debate towards the end. But at all events, we can ask ourselves, what do we mean when we talk about rural areas? It's not just a marginal sector which doesn't have any connectivity. It's not just a stagnant area or population that live in some inhospitable remote areas, but the possibility to develop dynamic relations with others. Then there's the concept of what we call rural urban communities, where people are beginning to enjoy mobile connectivity because of the proximity to the city, and then they have these interesting relations with universities and with academia, and there are some other organizations working in this area as well. So this is my reflection, my take on internet in rural Argentina. Patricio, over back to you. Perfect, Matthias. Thank you. That you made it very clear just how important infrastructure is in rural Argentina. So now we'll hear from Gustavo Giorgetti. We're going to go a little bit further down the Andean mountain range. Right, Gustavo, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge Adriana and Olga in my gratitude for giving me the chance to speak here at the South School of Internet Governance. Let me go over some of the topics that are going on in this world that I would like to share with you. We're going to be addressing something that is happening in Argentina that traces back to many years ago, more than 10 years. And after the COVID-19 pandemic, it grew exponentially, that is in parallel. Something that we would like to see, the purpose of which is to improve as much as possible the experience of people in all roles now and ever. And why is that? Is because this is going to be quoted later on. It means that we cannot wait for technology to come to improve the state of affairs right now, and then to continue leveraging that technology in the future. So it's a pun or it's a play on words that tries to leverage what is going on at any point in time. We're going to focus on ecosystems. This is going to be widely used. Ecosystems imply complex networks where One could find two key variables that are efficiency and resilience. That is, anybody could join the ecosystem because they want to improve things better, easier. So there is a concept of efficiency, but on the other hand, that is offered or provided needs to be sustainable throughout time. So I cannot move from the farm to the cities and then have energy shortages or blackouts or that the internet is down or that the home office banking side is down. So it's not a matter of efficiency, but there's something that is called resilience that is stronger, and it has two sub variables. And one has to do with diversity and interconnectivity. Diversity, because if I have a power shortage, I have to switch it manually, and interconnectivity has to resume its services digitally. So we're talking about something that has to do with the ecosystem. We're talking about economics. I'm sure that you cannot put all the eggs in the same basket because many of the investments that are made on the one side are maybe fly to the most advantageous side. And if I cannot liquidate those assets, I cannot place another investment. So efficiency and resiliency are the most important factors, or the two factors. The problem is not that we have a problem with diversity, but with interconnectivity. That is how we interconnect that diversity that we create. The other keyword that is going to be widely used is integration, or the capacity of integration. That is, be able to integrate over interoperability. When we have many things connected and I build upon that interoperability. And here we have pathology that Matthias is going to help me out to write it and where this falls in the many sectors that are kind of lying behind. And I'm going to speak of those that are widely used over the internet, those that have total access to the internet. And there's a pathology that is called digital distancing. And that implies the systems that they don't talk to each other because there's no interoperability or the right one. They eventually use human beings as the interface. So every time that we enter a site, we borrow some data and we paste it somewhere else. We are the interface of systems that are not capable of facilitating that communication, even though it allows this through technology. And we are going to cover all the things that we're doing. Very briefly, we're going to review what we're doing today. Digital government. Digital government that has the paradigm as a citizen doing paperwork over the net or over the web has gone through many steps. The first one is to digitalize the internal processes within the organization. The other one is to go further and to relate it to the citizen and the state. And the third one is to connect many services in a single application. So we're going to label it like GDE, TAD, my Argentina, and eventually the fourth one is that there's no way of making progress if we cannot have interoperability. So the indicators that we use are digitalized paperwork, requests, visits, time that we save and digitalize. It exists, but the minute is different. We discussed this during the previous panel, and we are reinventing the wheel, but digitally. So while we were waiting online or we waiting in line, right now we are waiting online over the portal, over the internet. So we kill ourselves to improve the quality of service for citizens. And that improvement has a bias by any of the stakeholders of the citizen that has to interact with everybody because that paperwork requests the participation of many stakeholders. Eventually, is the interface, humanly speaking, with the many portals and mechanisms required by these multi-stakeholders. So before, when everything was on paper, the interoperability model was a single one. Paperwork is very or highly interoperable. Right now that we have many patterns, one or some of them are still on paper, we need to break that paradigm shift, and we make a transition from the physical to the heterogeneous one right now. So this is the image that we built with the tool that shows clearly the transition between the organizations. Every circle is an agency, and every path is a route that a citizen takes physically or online from one point to the other. So that distance that we hasten digitally that is hard to see within the organization is what we need to fulfill. And that paradigm shift, that is, not to have an hour looking, but to be in the shoes of the citizen, is what Estonia has done. Estonia successfully provided this standard of living to citizens. And you will see what e-government or smart government is intangible, sensible, and proactive. Why is it invisible? Because I don't need to do any paperwork. There's a paradigm shift of what I have to do. Sensible because he knows what can be done, and is proactive because I receive it before any claims. There were three things that we cannot do it digitally in Estonia. It was marry somebody, divorce, or buying a house. Right now, they are able to solve buying property, but historically there are two elements that can be done online or physically. That is to marry and to get a divorce. It's a tradition, so it's not going to be eradicated right now. But what's behind, what is underlying this model? Because sometimes you can see technology, you can see screens, applications, and services. But what is underlying that paradigm shift that Estonia has made? And they talk about paperwork-free citizens. So basically, we achieve what we intend to do if we have paperwork free or online paperwork. But however, if we see that this is free of paperwork, this is different, and we have to approach it in new ways. Now, the path they take of the course they set, regardless of what is being done today, what is being done is to connect with others. So the first thing that I do is interoperability, interconnectivity. Second, I solve or I digitalize that path or that transition that I showed a few minutes ago. And this is the entanglement that needs to be solved, not within within the organization. The organization can work on paper. However, the impact is to take that path or that transition that the citizen has to make. However, if I solve the transition, that will require the collaboration of many organizations. If I'm able to digitalize that over an app, the only thing that is left is to see what I have to do internally to provide those services in more efficiently and better. So the route changes. Instead of overwhelming that guy with different models of interaction, what I'm doing is to have a single model of interactivity, and later we're going to address how we use that. And the different organizations and agencies interoperating in order to solve the paperwork that he has to file. That difference is a matter of the way we're trying to solve the solution and how we are going to go about that solution. However, if we want to delve into these models, the old paradigm shift or the old paradigm of paperwork, bureaucracy, red tape at the office transitions to the web, that is e-government, and then no paperwork, like the example of Estonia, in the invincible way, and they are in another learning curve, and those are digital servants or public officials over the internet. Let's see what kind of support changes. In the digital arena, there's no wallpaper. In the invisible world, there are no documents or files either. And in the smart world, there are no apps or portals any longer. As you can see, the technical supports are disappearing. Everybody's here. However, Estonia is ahead of all governments. Let's see what makes this model possible in Estonia. So the route that we take is what I showed before, all these steps. First, we start with isolated system in silos. Then we connect the silos. That means that they talk to each other without disturbing anybody to request things. And then we start coordination, articulating the activities that they need to carry out, that is moments of life, what they do on their daily lives, that it needs to be solved by the articulation of multiple organizations. And then artificial intelligence or AI solving all these steps in the background. The beauty of this is to summarize all things that we can understand, very complex technology that is underlying, but the guiding principles or the beacon that shows this kind of demonstration are many. However, there are three pillars that are important for Latin America. The first one is the principle of once only. I'm sure that you heard about this principle. It's one of the most popular and most of the developed concepts. Once only means that if there's an organization that data resides in one place, you should request it because that agency can interact digitally with you and prevent you from requesting it again. So you have the demise of not controlling or not requirements, but the demise of this transition or papers because this can be verified without disturbing any citizens. The second principle is very disruptive, and these are proactive processes. The idea that there's a convergence of many organizations serving citizens. And then open interface, technologically speaking, it may be more complex by developers, allows people that my development can be used by others, but not subject to open source or adding new functionalities or features, but merely, but regardless of the technology that we use or language or programming language, apart from the user's interface, I'm going to use an API, a web service, so somebody can continue adding, combining, or merging services from different organizations. Later on, we are going to see this. This is a privately held company that created these features or apps and portals that facilitates to solve things for citizens proactively, okay? So you buy a car and you go to the car dealers. You need to get the insurance policy. You go to City Hall to get your license plate. So imagine all the stakeholders facilitating the time when you buy the car, when you make the purchase. The same when you're born. Certificate of birth. When you are born in Estonia, the medical doctor, regardless of the system or regardless of the application, is required by law to communicate with the civil registrar. And he tells, okay, out of this parent, mother or father, you have this child. This child is born, has no ID, no name, but this baby was born and he's going to have an ID in the civil registrar, and that is going to ask what the name is going to be, and they have 30 days to name the baby. And at the same time, it's going to warn proactively other stakeholders like social care and then healthcare system or whatever, and if they share the same healthcare insurance, I'm sure that that is going to be associated to the baby. If not, they're going to request what health insurance you want, and it's going to tell the families that there's a newborn, and that school that are close to the radio, that family, are going to request the family if in 4 or 5 years' time they will have residence in the same domicile because they are going to book that vacancy. So knowing full well how much information you need, how you use this selectively of what is going on in real time or in real life, even school becomes well planned despite the dynamics of the population. So imagine how disruptive this is and how many algorithms are involved in this process. The same goes for a factory, the same goes for a prescription or anything. The difference lies that there's no single strategy or digital prescription. There are many stakeholders having their own systems talking to each other. So it's digital proximity, avoiding any interfaces. So if you travel to Estonia and you have to develop a startup, the best thing you can do is to understand that environment and to see what the problem is there, because there are unsolved problems, and probably you can come up with a problem that it could be a DPM or a smart contract, that by joining the APIs that are existing and consulting to the data that you can request and that you are registering, and you come up with a rationale that can solve the problem that you're raising. And the logic is, for example, drivers are required. There are many drivers in Estonia, since there are icy roads, like for example in Tallinn. So there are services that require people to get on board a digital device or service that tells you 30 meters in advance what is the likelihood of skidding or crashing on the corner. So imagine, given my driving history, that I offer that to the application to help me out, and knowing the weather, what the weather is like, the statistics of traffic, gathering that information, algorithm can tell me, you better brake here because there's a likelihood, 80% likelihood to crash your car. So open interfaces are great regardless of the portal. What is the unique portal that you know? There's no unique portal in Argentina because nobody can build that. Because the person is going to build his or her own portal. But the easy thing is integration. Here, this is one by a private company and one made by the state. They have all the services. I can go to my medical record, and here I go to the same medical record because the services that are underneath or underlying belong to the same stakeholders that they are opening those files to be extensive. The same thing with the digital assistance of AI. Imagine that there's a draft resolution that is called bureaucrat. Bureaucrat or CRAT is an assistant for farming. And they have used this and they transitioned that to artificial intelligence. So imagine that we can speak of 120 services or paperwork that one can do that are totally assisted through AI. So I can speak with an interface that could be Alexa, Google, Siri. There were players that were challenged during the 2020 by Estonia to interoperate on top of their structure or topology. And we can request our digital assistant, and that assistant is going to construe and interpret and understand a generic question. Is it going to rain? What's the weather like? How do I renew the passport I lost? A new issuance of the passport, and have geolocalization. And this is done between Estonia and Finland. If I'm in Finland and I come from Estonia, I'm going to have other stakeholders. However, we are going to end up in that interoperability platform that dates back to 2001. I bring to the table something that I believe is totally invisible, but highly critical, and everything that is coming in terms of AI, big data, metaverse, and blockchain. I believe that is stagnated because it has like a handbrake, because there's no enough interoperability. And there's something that is positive about Estonia is that they have massive interoperability. It's not the most advanced country in terms of technology. However, it is the one that has the most interoperability, accounting to 97% of that interoperability. That means that only 3% of the data that is new, that is being created, are uploaded by manually by people over a portal. The rest is being moved digitally among the servers in private or in public hands, even the banking system. So this quote about digital distancing is going to be reinforced as an idea, and we need to think how we are going to overcome the challenge, because it's an issue of paradigm, not of technology. Interconnected systems should be interconnected like this. The problem of the internet is not designed to be safe, but to communicate systems, and that it is successful. Estonia adds a layer, a tier on top of it. So what I'm going to discuss, it's the next tier of the internet. To be on top of that, they use the topology that is a four-corner topology. When they trace back to 2001, there was no name for it. And it was a fad to have the three-corner ones. So imagine that they're 20 years more advanced than the rest of the world. The two-corner ones is when I have an interface with the other systems. And we know full well that it has an exponential process because the more problems or the more systems I connect and I need to talk to wherever is connected, the growth of interfaces is exponential. So it's not feasible. And that has been one of the limitations for developing digital applications across the world. Dating back to the 90s, by the end of the 90s, there's an emergence of the SOA architecture. And then you have interoperability bus services. Now, this mechanism prevents that exponential growth and allows elements to be connected more simply at once, and they create two problems: a point of failure, and second, a loss of control of the ownership of information. I was the owner here and I had the right to enter whatever computer. Here, there's an interoperability bus that is going to prevent the access to that information. And then you have the four-corner one. I believe that internet is a four-corner system where you have communication through nodes, and there's no direct communication. So there's a node communication that maintains the standards. And that node runs over the open internet. So the internet channel is the one that facilitates that thousands of millions of nodes are interconnected and that talk to each other. We maintain the control in every stakeholder, and the interface or the work that is being done for adapting is one for every participant. It's like speaking a language of some other, or if I have to speak Chinese, Greek, Spanish, or whatever, or we can learn by default a language just like English, and we know that we can converge in English and we can understand each other. This is the advantage of the four-corner model, and Estonia dates back to this model back in 2001. So it's called X-Road, and they add a security tier or layer that is easy to use and packet it over the open internet that we discussed before. How do they add that? Through KPI certificates and the timestamps in order to certify the time when these transactions are made. Why is that? Because to make this possible and to open and connect my systems in such a way that I do it globally with others, that I have to connect because I need to connect to other servers and somebody can see my data. So I am the one that will allow others to have access to my data. So the need is to use data from multiple stakeholders with security and reliability. And Estonia puts in the four-corner model the 5 pillars. One is trust through digital identity, asymmetrical certificates, and security, safe, secure exchanges to sign digitally, to authenticate, universal protocols. They are able to impact not as much as possible, like SOAR, REST, solely transparent. And we are proving that any other protocol that is being developed is not being affected by this component. So anybody could use what is using today. Ownership responsibility. I own the data. I am the one that decides who sees my data or not. I am speaking of legal persons, not individuals, and that is verifiable. So the exchange of information that is done over a security layer could be registered in such a way so that nobody can tamper with that medical record. of who talked to whom, and this becomes binding as a document. There are laws in Argentina that provide the non-repudiation to those exchanges that have done in this way. So to conclude my remarks and for you to have an idea of what Xroad is, it's like a digital container. So we may think that globalization is not the internet, even though we are in the internet governance school, but it's because of this standardized container made of tin that allow us to carry things from one place to another in a safe way. X-Road is widely known by the United Nations as a public good, digital public good, and there are no counter effects or counter indications, and it can be used freely. This is dating back to 2020, and this is the major deployment across the world. There are 16% of the countries across the world, as a matter of fact, have deployed X-Road. When you go over 16%, there's a valley of depth here in the adoption curve. Let's see what happens over the years. But I believe that this is going to be subject to exponential growth. The N is created by the Nordic Institute of Interoperability as the one that fund this in order to improve the technology. The ones that have the N are members of the institute, but they don't make no contributions, and the one with the cross or crosses are under production. We have Argentina, for example. These are the ones that are operating in Brazil, in Mexico, and in some other parts of Latin America. This is used by Israel, by Palestine, and this is not communicated. Estonia and Finland are federated, and we can go with data from one place to another with total control and freedom. The same thing with Japan. Germany uses that, not the public part or the public sector, because they have used interoperability and it's very costly to make changes, but the private health sector uses that in Germany. So there are many stakeholders that are using it. Brian, let me focus on what's going on in Argentina, because as a matter of fact, this was the purpose of this talk. Let me address the first stakeholder that used the four-corner model for interoperability is Neuquén, dating back to 2008-9. As of the case or the experience of Estonia, as it was a closed system software, with the Sabatus triangle, the University of Cobao and my organization and the province of Neuquén developed a clone. And by cloning, we started developing things, and with non-technology elements is what we added for this to work. When Estonia and Finland in 2016 released the X-Road code and signed an agreement, we replaced our vehicle of interoperability by the Ferrari that they have kept their patent, so to speak, for 20 years. This is what needs to be solved in any kind of state-owned model, sharing data or queries. Sometimes it's not data. Sometimes I know to know if there's a query, if there's a data in that, or it's blacklisted. So I need to know to share the queries from the source, from those that produce the data. There are other sources, but data are not technology in nature. They're highly representatives of the reality, and there's a distance between data and reality is not good. And the copies of data, they break the quality of information. So to find the data in that source that is produced is key, and we can do it in real time. And then we can have an inter-organizational cross-functional process in order to serve or to understand the citizen, and then to get rid of the APIs and services to build smart applications. In 2013 and in 2014, by the end of 2014, we hired IRAM, the ISO's Institute of Argentina, to create an ISO standard. So in Neuquén, every software that is added to the public sector could be certifiable under the ISO standards in Argentina. So there was an emergency of some clusters to share data and that are supplementary and to release and to build on top of those services. And you have the integrability service or model and the ecosystem model. Neuquén even runs the Estonian product, the extract over a Raspberry. We even have an ISP that offers as part of the internet service. So at home, I can even include this security layer. The security layer of the leader of the leading countries of NATO, that is Estonia, can be applied to the Internet of Things elements that I have at home, the IoT, and the gateway is that one. So I have a camera that is aiming at the server, and I have a lamp that is intelligent, that is smart, that is on by itself, it's automatic. And can be solved by the Internet of Things. In 2020, and I believe that we had a tailwind that favored this development, this was very interesting for Neuquén. We created a working group with at the national level, and we turned it the IRAM number 14 or 17,610 into an international ISO standard. So this is the final standard of how we create ecosystems or digital systems and what it takes to operate. This is the core of the standard. Is based on what can drafted, and in 2017 what the European Union has drafted. We have the technical part where X-Road solves everything, the semantics also that has to do with the topics, whether it is health, HL7, if we're speaking about bandwidth, oil, gas. If we're talking about blockchain, digital distancing because of the COVID-19 pandemic, or e-commerce, I mean, please do not create a new semantic because you're going to waste time. I mean, whatever topic there is, you will find a working group that works on that. The problem with the working groups is they focus on the semantics, which is fundamental and is good. But when you go to the technical layer, each one of them creates their own security system. So we have the miscellaneous security layers. So if I use health, I have health standard. For blockchain, I have financial. If I use banking systems, I have another security layer. So the standard intends that we all work under the same security level, regardless of the level, but they have to be shared. Organizational means create and share data, create services and processes. There are not so many clear rules. I mean, there are vacant rules. I mean, we extrapolated the Estonia model and we took it to Neuquén, and then legislation of the province of Neuquén that needs to be complied with or fulfilled, regardless of the law, whether it is future or present. It needs to be complied with, needs to be supported from the organization point of view, needs requires semantics, and the standard of technology that needs to be used should be supported. If it's not supported by lower layers, evidently, I will have a problem or a challenge. In 2020, through COFEFUP, that is the Public Function Commission, we started creating a movement at the federal level because the model had to respect the actual power. If I have a centralized system in a federal country, it makes no sense because I'm going to break not technology. It's a matter of power of who owns who, or who owns what. So this has to be at the federal level. So in the COFEFUP, even Argentina offered the possibility of connecting cloning X-Road, that is the MCI, that could be federated with X-Road systems, that is in Argentina, as we're going to see in many other locations. Today, Argentina is under this situation. We started with X-Road, with the cloning, through different phases, and we have this law that provides other elements and provides the non-repudiation law to the exchange of data, which is probatory. It's a binding document, every query that I make in the systems. Based on this strategy with the governance methodology that would be good to analyze it for internet governance, that for now is being used for this purpose, we got Chaco in a period of 11 months to make baby steps and to have the first ecosystem. It's not that was going to be complex. The ecosystem grows by itself as any other living organism. It's like a baby with all the complexity of human beings. So that had to be present in the cells or in the DNA to evolve. In 6 months, this evolved, and then we created the one in Catamarca. These are babies. They're not walking, they're toddling, they're connecting things, and these are users cases that are being connected. In Neuquén, it's in having teenage problems, and by year end, we're completing Mendoza and the city of Buenos Aires. And these are two important cases with a level of complexity and context that is much broader to the ones that we have addressed before. And there are 4 additional provinces that are about to start in 2023 with this project. So as you can see, regardless of the model is that every province could have their own system, and then there's a federation with the different provinces. And with Argentina, we have the ISO standard locally, and Argentina integrating the provinces with X-Road and with other countries of Latin America that are being used this. And here we have the map of Argentina and Chile. There's an initiative underway that is very conflictive, and you have the Andean Bridge. So in between the borders between Mendoza and Chile, for example, you could transfer goods from one place to another, from one location in just one day, in hours, and not what it takes now, that is 6 or 7 days, because of all the digital distancing. To give you an idea, in Mendoza, in Libertadoras, that we shared that with Chile, which is a physical merger, there's a servers room where they have 7 servers, one for every public organization, for Chile and for Argentina, that interoperate with all the data that is being transferred and with all the trucks that go from one country to another. And the only thing that they have in common is the air conditioner and power. The rest of the data that are being transferred one server to another are done manually through a window. So that takes forever, and this handover is not done so efficiently. Then we have Colombia, that's that by default, by law. They were not able to overcome the technological challenges. However, they will do so. El Salvador has X-Road. They haven't solved and they haven't been successful technology. Mexico has 1 state and a half with X-Road, Brazil 2. Argentina 5, Brazil 2, Mexico 1.5. Panama is seeing how they are going to implement it. The same goes for Costa Rica. Ecuador is still wondering if it's convenient to leave aside some interoperability conventional model and to go to X-Road, to migrate to X-Road. But however, the learning that we take from Estonia is not to change what works, is to set aside what works as it is and to connect on the corners, because Uruguay is one of the most advanced countries and it's not planning to change the interoperability model by another one or by a new one, but is thinking to use X-Road for international trade. So I add to the quote of Gunter Pelly, who is the creator of the blue economy. Says if Latin America worked comprehensively, it would be a power that would be superior to China. And he does that referring to the area that is half of the area that we have in Latin America, and the population, which accounts for doubling China. So it doubles the number of people that live in Latin America. So interestingly enough, what I was telling you about is that this interoperability that is cross-border has to do with connecting one or 2 countries. And then we have the GA network, and they are working along the lines towards this successful experience. The takeaway is that we need coexistence of networks that are digital, open, and extensible to have a digital ecosystem where everybody can innovate, reusing, supplementing, and combining emerging solutions of different technologies and providers without fearing blockage or any blockade, obsolescence, or initiatives without any future. And this is what discussed in the previous panel. By sharing information, I always close with this cartoon by Kino that shows the paradigm shift. On top, you have the citizens waiting in line with the public official. And down below, you have all the public officials to wait on a citizen. This paradigm shift cannot be done with a physical paper technology. However, it is possible, unlikely, with the digital technology. The only thing that we can do is to shift the paradigm. I mean, we cannot do everything. We have to do a part and integrate it to others. And trust is attained when that is provided by the ecosystem, by the context, by the environment. That is not internet, it's just an additional tier, an additional security layer that it could be X-Road or other options or four-corner models. And this is one that provides that trust that will facilitate progress. Thank you very much. Gustavo, excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I hope that we have time for some questions. That was an amazing presentation. I think it's left us a little bit speechless, really, all this new stuff. I do have a couple of questions for you, if you have a couple of minutes more. I wanted to welcome Anabel Cisneros, who's finally joined us. She's the director of ARSAT. She couldn't join us before, but I did want to welcome her now. Hi, Anabel. We wanted to hear from you, if possible. Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. Sorry, I'm late. Today, we had a board meeting with the CONAP. And in the background, you can see a picture of the model of our satellite. So thank you for inviting me. I did have a presentation to share with you. I don't know if there is any time to share with you some of the issues. I wanted to talk about connectivity in Argentina. Do you have 5 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay, yeah, I promise, 5 minutes. That's going to be very swift. I want to share my screen. The presentation was probably going to be a little bit longer, but the fact is that, well, I tell you what, we're going to look at the most important issues which have to do with infrastructure and connectivity. I'll leave you the video about what internet is, because sometimes when we talk about connectivity, we associate connectivity with internet, which is logical, but there are some differences between one and the other. Internet is a network of networks which connects us all, and connectivity is more of a holistic issue. So I'll leave you the address of that video, and I'm going to move on to the targets at global level. And then I'll tell you what's happening in the region and in Argentina. These are the aspirational targets established by the International Telecommunications Union, which is in charge of regulation of telecommunications around the world. And they've set these targets, which are truly aspirational, as they're very broad. One of them is, for instance, is to ensure that 100% of fixed broadband subscriptions be over 10 megabytes per second, and that the minimum download speed in schools and in educational institutionals be 20 megabytes per second, that the minimum download speed available for each student be of 50 kilobytes per second, and that the minimum data allowance for every school be of 200 gigabytes. So these are the targets established by the UTI. This is what's now I'm going to tell you what's happening in the region with regard to these targets. These are some data from around the world, but let's take a closer look at the region. Now, when we talk about connectivity, we're talking about access to internet in homes, residential areas, and that's the first difference between connectivity and access to internet. How we access that network. And when we talk about connectivity, we're talking about homes that are connected on fixed internet. These can be fixed connections, or they can be mobile, they can be Wi-Fi. Depends on the Wi-Fi technology. They can even be satellite connections. But the idea of talking about real access to internet has to do with a fixed network. And this doesn't have to do with the numbers of people or mobile devices. Now, what I wanted to show you was how Argentina is positioned vis-a-vis the rest of the region. As we can see, it's doing quite well, 66%. But the reality is that when we talk about 66% connectivity, we are implicitly talking about the fact that 34% of our population does not have access to internet. So in terms of the region, it looks like we're quite good, but in real terms, we're not doing so well. And we're very far from complying with those aspirational targets as set by the Telecommunications Union. Now, what's happening in Argentina? As we can see, in the fourth quarter of last year, moving away from the pandemic, which modified all of these datas and the percentages. In the fourth quarter of 2021, 64% of urban homes have access to a computer. That means a device, a PC, if you like. 90.4% have access to internet. So this seems, on the surface of it, to be a very good percentage of it. These data are collected by the INDEC, and they show that 88 of each 100 people have access to a telephone, a cell phone, and 87 of each 100 use internet. Now, other numbers which we've gathered have to do with the fact that in the second quarter of 2022, there were nearly 8 million access points to fixed internet. That means 8 million homes. In real terms, this meant an increase of 1.3% compared with the second quarter of 2021. Now, when we talk about penetration among homes, we're talking about access per 100 homes. And one of the things I want to show you here is how this has risen in our country. If you look at the difference between January, the first quarter of 2018, to the first quarter of this year, the percentage has increased considerably. But we're still quite far from the aspirational target set by the International Telecommunications Union. Now, if we dive deep into the 63% of Argentina's representation in the region, we can see where the gaps are. We're looking at the differences between provinces such as Córdoba and La Pampa, which are those which have the highest connectivity levels or highest access to fixed internet. These data reflect the first quarter of 2022. You can see how access to internet in each province also reveals a digital gap, particularly between the north and the south and the center of the country. The city of Buenos Aires has 117%. There are more accesses than homes, which means that there is more than one access to internet in some of the homes, which is in stark difference to what's going on in other provinces. There are three numbers which are marked in red, which have the highest connectivity levels, such as the one with the highest connectivity is La Pampa, and the lowest one, which is in Formosa, which isn't 35%. That means that 70 out of 100 homes do not have access to any form of internet, which means it's extremely far from the target. Now, that's pretty impressive, and it speaks volumes about the digital gap, particularly as regards connectivity. Then I have some other numbers I wanted to share with you that explain that why, when we're talking about connectivity, we're talking about different ways of accessing internet. I will be sharing this presentation with you so that you can take your time over it and look at the different Wi-Fi systems and see that the role that they play, as well as the management of the radio frequencies, which enable us to communicate. Well, fiber optics, for instance, when we talk about cabled or wired networks, we're talking about different kinds of connectivity, and fiber optics is the most efficient one today. And I also have a short video on how the satellite communication systems function. So you can take a deeper look at that. I'm also going to leave you some figures as a conclusion. Obviously, lots of stuff I would like to show you, but I just don't have time in this 5 minutes. Obviously, and you will have a lot of questions as well, particularly for Gustavo and Matias, who spoke before I did. So I just wanted to close with these numbers, which tell us a little bit about what's really happening in this country. Over 59% of fixed internet connections are over 30 megabytes per second. But look at that digital gap. There are still in our country connections of 512 kilobytes per second, or 1 mega, which is really low considering what applications need these days and the kind of access levels that we've become used to. And also, you'll see that although the left-hand side chart shows that there's been growth from 2018 to 2022, particularly the evolution of connections using fiber optics, we can see how the older analog connections have been decreasing in use, just as ASL. We've also seen a growth in modem or HCC technologies, which are being used by larger companies, particularly those audiovisual companies, for instance, which migrated to become ITC or internet companies. Now, you can see that the Wi-Fi connections in our country, although there are obviously huge numbers of these, particularly in the areas of more difficult access and suburban areas, it's the line at the bottom, the green line there, actually remains more or less stable. And this shows us that although this technology is still popular, it hasn't grown very much. We're seeing greater investments in other kinds of technology, such as fiber optics. Here we can see, for instance, the growth in different access technologies, and some conclusions about the distribution of resources, speeds, and there are obviously lots more numbers to be shared with you about how all of this breaks down. But I know that we're very much up against the clock. So I'm going to hand the mic back to you. And thank you once again for giving me the opportunity to share with you very briefly what the situation is with internet and connectivity in Argentina. Thank you very much. Thank you, Annabelle. And thank you for keeping it brief. Sometimes the whole timing issues tends to make life complicated. Our schedule is very tight. Gustavo, we wanted you to hang around because we had some questions for you, but sadly, we really are running out of time. If there are any questions, because what Gustavo you were talking about really gave us a lot of food for thought. Lots of ideas there. We'll probably be forwarding questions to you from our participants, and perhaps you can answer them in greater detail. Thank you to both of you once again. I'm sorry to cut this short this way, but really we have no option. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gustavo. It was really impressive. I really want all the things that you were talking about. The other day, my son was saying, look, it's all integrated. Look, you just have to go to one place now, and that's all. I suppose that this is a learning process, isn't it? And it'll take some time for us to integrate things. I know it was nice to see you. I haven't seen you for a while now. I'm so sorry that we had to ask you to be brief, and I'm sorry that we don't get to ask you all these questions, but we have to move on to our last panelist. Big hugs and kisses from Buenos Aires. Please don't forget to share our presentations so we can send them to our participants. Thank you very much.